In the quiet corridors of the Portland Public Library, surrounded by towering shelves of dusty books and the gentle hum of fluorescent lights, Sarah Chen appeared to be just another unremarkable employee. Her days were filled with stamping due dates, organizing returned novels, and helping elderly patrons find large print mysteries. But what none of her co-workers knew was that the woman who quietly reshelved romance novels had once been one of the most lethal operatives in the CIA's Special Activities Division. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The same hands that now gently handled fragile manuscripts had once dismantled terrorist networks across 3 continents, and the mind that memorized library catalog numbers had previously held classified information that could topple governments. For 3 years, Sarah had successfully buried her past beneath cardigans and reading glasses. She had convinced herself that Agent Phoenix was dead, that Sarah Chen the librarian was her true identity. But secrets have a way of surfacing, especially when the Pentagon discovers that the greatest threat to national security in decades can only be stopped by someone who officially doesn't exist anymore. Sarah Chen's alarm clock buzzed at exactly 5:30 every morning, just as it had for the past 3 years. She rolled out of her narrow bed in the studio apartment she rented above a Vietnamese restaurant in southeast Portland. The familiar aroma of faux broth already wafting through the thin walls. Her morning routine was precise and unchanging. 20 minutes of yoga, a cup of green tea, and a slice of toast with honey. To any observer, she appeared to be a creature of simple habits, a woman who had found contentment in life's small pleasures. The walk to the Portland Public Library took exactly 17 minutes, a route Sarah had timed to the second. She passed the same coffee shop where the barista with the purple hair always waved, the same homeless veteran who sat by the bus stop reading paperback thrillers, the same construction site where workers in hard hats were slowly renovating an old warehouse. Sarah nodded politely to each familiar face, her smile warm but distant, never lingering long enough to invite deeper conversation. At 29, Sarah had perfected the art of being forgettable. Her shoulder-length black hair was always pulled back in a practical ponytail, her clothing consisting of muted cardigans and comfortable flats that made no sound on the library's polished floors. She wore wire-rimmed glasses that she didn't actually need, a prop that helped complete the image of the quiet, bookish woman she had become. Her colleagues at the library saw her as reliable but unremarkable, someone who always volunteered for the less desirable shifts and never complained about the mundane tasks that came with working in the reference section. The Central Library was an imposing brick building that had stood in downtown Portland for over a century, its Gothic architecture lending an air of gravitas to the pursuit of knowledge. Sarah badged in through the staff entrance at exactly 7:45, 30 minutes before the library opened to the public. She used this time to organize her workstation, review the day's scheduled events, and prepare for the steady stream of patrons who would need her assistance. Her supervisor, Margaret Hoffman, was a woman in her 50s who had dedicated her entire career to library science. She appreciated Sarah's quiet efficiency and reliability, often commenting to other staff members that Sarah was the kind of employee who made her job easier. Margaret had tried on several occasions to draw Sarah out, to learn more about her background or personal interests, but Sarah had mastered the art of deflection. She would smile and redirect conversations back to work topics, maintaining the careful boundaries she had established around her new identity. The morning proceeded like countless others before it. Sarah helped a college student locate research materials for a paper on World War II, assisted an elderly man in finding books about gardening, and processed a stack of returned novels that needed to be reshelved. Her movements were economical and precise, though she was careful to appear unhurried. What her co-workers didn't notice was how Sarah's eyes continuously scanned the library's entrances, how she positioned herself with clear sight lines to all exits, or how her fingers occasionally traced the edge of her desk in a pattern that matched the grip of a weapon she no longer carried. During her lunch break, Sarah ate a sandwich she had prepared at home while reading a biography of Eleanor Roosevelt. She sat in the staff room, appearing absorbed in her book, but her peripheral vision took in every person who entered or left the library. This constant state of awareness had become second nature to her, a survival mechanism that she couldn't fully suppress despite her attempts to embrace civilian life. The afternoon brought its usual mix of patrons. A group of teenagers worked on homework assignments, their whispered conversations punctuated by the occasional giggle. A businessman typed furiously on his laptop, taking advantage of the free Wi-Fi. Several regulars browsed the fiction section, people Sarah had come to recognize by their reading preferences and quiet habits. She helped a young mother find children's books about dinosaurs, her interaction gentle and patient, revealing a warmth that few people ever saw. As closing time approached, Sarah began her end-of-day routine. She powered down the computers, organized the reference materials, and did a final walkthrough of her section to ensure everything was in order. The library grew quiet as the last patrons departed, leaving only the soft hum of the heating system and the distant sound of the custodial staff beginning their nightly cleaning routine. Sarah was locking her desk drawer when she noticed the man. He sat alone at a table in the history section, a book open in front of him, but his attention was focused on her. He was perhaps 40 years old, with the kind of unremarkable appearance that suggested he had been trained to blend into crowds. His clothing was casual but neat, and he held himself with a subtle alertness that Sarah recognized immediately. She had seen that posture countless times before, in briefing rooms and safe houses, in the faces of people who made their living in the shadows. Their eyes met across the library floor, and Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The man's expression was neutral, but she could see recognition in his gaze. He knew who she was, or more accurately, who she had been. Sarah forced herself to maintain her composure, to continue her routine as if nothing had changed, but every instinct screamed at her to run. She finished her closing duties with deliberate calm, said goodnight to Margaret, and walked toward the staff exit. The man was gone when she looked back, but Sarah knew he was still there, somewhere in the building or perhaps waiting outside. She had been found, and the carefully constructed life she had built was about to crumble. The walk home felt different that evening. Sarah took a longer route, doubling back twice to check for surveillance, her dormant training reasserting itself. Despite her efforts to remain calm, she stopped at a convenience store and used the reflection in the window to scan the street behind her. Nothing obvious, but that didn't mean she wasn't being watched. Professional surveillance was nearly impossible to detect without specialized equipment, and Sarah had been away from that world long enough to feel rusty. Her apartment seemed smaller when she returned, the walls closing in as she contemplated the implications of what had happened. Sarah made herself a cup of tea and sat at her small kitchen table, staring out the window at the neon sign of the restaurant below. The familiar routine felt hollow now, a performance she had been giving for an audience that no longer existed. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The reading room at Powell's Books. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. Come alone. No signature, no explanation. Just coordinates for a meeting that she instinctively knew she would attend. The message deleted itself after she read it, a sign that whoever had sent it had access to technology that went well beyond civilian capabilities. She spent the night staring at the ceiling, her mind racing through possibilities and contingencies. Sarah had left her old life behind for good reasons, reasons that had seemed compelling enough to justify abandoning everything she had trained for. But now that past was reaching out to reclaim her, and she found herself wondering if she had ever truly escaped at all. The next morning, Sarah's routine felt like a charade. She went through the motions of her normal schedule, arriving at the library on time and greeting her colleagues with the same polite smile she had worn for 3 years. But underneath the facade, her mind was working through escape routes and identity protocols, the mental muscles of her former profession flexing after years of disuse. Margaret noticed that Sarah seemed distracted during the morning staff meeting, her usual attentiveness replaced by a distant quality that suggested her thoughts were elsewhere. When asked about her weekend plans, Sarah gave a vague response. About catching up on reading, the same deflection she had perfected, but now felt more necessary than ever. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. Sarah helped patrons and processed returns, but part of her attention was always on the clock, counting down the minutes until the meeting that would either restore her old life or destroy her new. 1. She had no illusions about the nature of such invitations. People in her former line of work didn't reach out for social visits or friendly check-ins. They called when they needed something, and what they usually needed was dangerous enough to justify pulling a ghost back from the dead. At 1:30, Sarah told Margaret she was taking her lunch break. She walked the 10 blocks to Powell's Books, the legendary independent bookstore that occupied an entire city block and drew readers from around the world. The store's maze-like layout and multiple entrances made it an ideal location for a clandestine meeting, offering numerous ways to arrive, observe, and disappear if necessary. The reading room was on the 3rd floor, a quiet space with comfortable chairs and large windows that looked out onto the busy street below. Sarah arrived 5 minutes early and selected a seat that gave her a clear view of both entrances. She picked up a book on local history and pretended to read while her eyes scanned the room for potential threats or surveillance. At exactly 2 o'clock, a woman entered the reading room. She was in her 50s, with silver hair cut in a professional bob and the kind of understated elegance that spoke of power and authority. She wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than Sarah made in a month, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. The woman selected a book from a nearby shelf and sat in the chair across from Sarah. For several minutes, they both maintained the pretense of reading, 2 strangers sharing a quiet space in a public bookstore. Finally, the woman spoke without looking up from her book. "Agent Phoenix," she said quietly, using the codey name that Sarah had hoped never to hear again. "It's been a long time." Sarah's grip tightened on her book, but she didn't look up. "I'm sorry, I think you have me confused with someone else. My name is Sarah Chen. I work at the library." The woman smiled, expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Ms. Chen, my name is Director Catherine Walsh. I'm the Deputy Director of Operations for the CIA, and I'm here because we need Agent Phoenix to come back to work." Sarah finally looked up, meeting Walsh's gaze for the first time. "Agent Phoenix is dead. She died in a warehouse in Kiev 3 years ago, along with half her team. The CIA made that very clear in their debriefing." Walsh closed her book and leaned back in her chair. "Phoenix may have died officially, but Sarah Chen retained all of her skills, her training, and her security clearance, which, I might add, was never fully revoked despite your resignation." "I didn't resign," Sarah said quietly. "I was told my services were no longer required after the Kiev incident. I was told that I was a liability to operational security." Walsh's expression softened slightly. "Yes, about that. It turns out that some of the intelligence we used to make that assessment was flawed. Recent developments have brought new information to light about what really happened in Kiev, and about who was responsible for the intelligence failure that led to your team's exposure." Sarah felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach. "What kind of new information?" "The kind that suggests Agent Phoenix was set up by someone within the agency." Someone who wanted her team neutralized because they were getting too close to something they weren't supposed to see. Walsh paused, letting the implications sink in. Someone who has been feeding classified information to hostile foreign governments for the past 5 years. The reading room suddenly felt too small, too exposed. Sarah's training kicked in automatically, her eyes scanning for exits and potential threats. Why should I believe you? Why should I trust anything the agency tells me after what happened? Walsh reached into her purse and pulled out a tablet, sliding it across the table to Sarah. Because this time, we have proof. Financial records, communication intercepts, operational timelines. Everything we need to identify the traitor and bring them to justice. Sarah stared at the tablet without touching it. And you need me because the mole is someone with access to the highest levels of intelligence. Someone who knows our procedures, our personnel, our operational methods. We need someone who can operate outside normal channels, someone who officially doesn't exist. Walsh leaned forward. We need Agent Phoenix. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. If Walsh was telling the truth, then everything she had believed about her disgrace was a lie. The deaths of her teammates, the destruction of her career, the years of exile and anonymity, all of it had been orchestrated by someone she had trusted, someone who had used her as a convenient scapegoat. Who is it? Sarah asked quietly. Walsh shook her head. Not here. Not until you agree to come back. This operation is classified at the highest levels. If you're in, you'll get a full briefing at a secure location. If you're not, she shrugged. Then you go back to your library and we pretend this conversation never happened. Sarah looked out the window at the busy street below, at the ordinary people going about their ordinary lives. For 3 years, she had tried to become one of them, to find peace in this simple routine of civilian existence. But the truth was, she had never stopped being Agent Phoenix. She had just been a phoenix in hiding, waiting for the right moment to rise from the ashes. If I do this, Sarah said slowly, I want certain guarantees. I want to know exactly what happened in Kiev, who was responsible, and why. I want full operational authority, no oversight from anyone I don't trust. And I want the right to walk away if I don't like what I find. Walsh nodded. Done, but I should warn you, Phoenix. This operation is going to be dangerous. We're not just hunting a traitor, we're hunting someone who has been playing this game for years. Someone who knows all our moves before we make them. Sarah stood up, leaving the tablet on the table. Then it's a good thing you're bringing back someone who never officially existed to begin with. Someone who can make moves they won't see coming. She walked toward the exit, pausing only to look back at Walsh. How do I contact you? Walsh smiled, the first genuine expression Sarah had seen from her. You don't. We'll contact you. Pack light, Phoenix. You're going back to work. As Sarah left the bookstore, she felt the weight of her old identity settling back onto her shoulders. Like a familiar coat. The quiet librarian was already beginning to fade, replaced by the woman who had once been one of the CIS most effective operatives. Agent Phoenix was coming back to life, and this time, she was going to get answers. The walk back to the library felt different now. Sarah's senses were heightened, her awareness sharpened to a razor's edge. She noticed things she had trained herself to ignore. The man in the coffee shop who was watching the street instead of reading his newspaper. The woman on the bus who had gotten off at the same stop as Sarah 3 days in a row. The van parked across from the library that had been there for 2 weeks but never seemed to move. Sarah's apartment that evening felt like a staging area rather than a home. She looked at her modest possessions with new eyes, cataloging what she would need to take and what she could leave behind. The books, the comfortable furniture, the photographs of a life that had never been entirely real, all of it belonged to Sarah Chen, the librarian. Agent Phoenix traveled light and left no traces. She spent the night preparing for a departure she knew was inevitable. Sarah Chen had been a useful identity, a safe harbor in a storm that had lasted 3 years. But storms eventually pass, and Phoenix was ready to fly again. 3 days passed in a strange limbo where Sarah maintained her librarian routine while mentally preparing for a world she had left behind. She had heard nothing from Director Walsh since their meeting at Powell's, and part of her wondered if the encounter had been some elaborate test or psychological evaluation. But on Thursday morning, as she was processing a shipment of new mystery novels, Margaret approached her desk with an unusual expression. "Sarah, there's someone here to see you," Margaret said, her voice carrying a note of confusion. "He says he's from the State Department. Something about verifying your employment history for a security clearance update." Sarah's blood ran cold. She had never applied for any government position, never submitted any paperwork that would trigger a background investigation. This was either Walsh's doing or something far more sinister. She followed Margaret to the front desk, where a man in an expensive suit waited with a leather briefcase and the kind of patient smile that government bureaucrats perfected. "Miss Chen," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Agent David Morrison, State Department Security. I apologize for the unannounced visit, but we're conducting routine verification for a position you may have applied for. Could we speak privately?" Sarah shook his hand, noting the firmness of his grip and the callus on his trigger finger that suggested he was more than a paper-pushing bureaucrat. "I think there's been some mistake. I haven't applied for any government positions." Morrison's smile widened. "Sometimes these applications are submitted on behalf of qualified candidates by supervisors or colleagues who recognize their potential. Perhaps we could discuss this somewhere more private." Margaret was watching the exchange with obvious curiosity, and Sarah realized she had no choice but to play along. She led Morrison to one of the library's small conference rooms, closing the door behind them and immediately regretting the isolation. Morrison set his briefcase on the table and opened it, revealing not paperwork but a sophisticated electronic device that he activated with a quick series of button presses. "Countermeasures," he explained, noting her recognition of the equipment. "This room is now electronically clean. We can speak freely." Sarah remained standing, positioning herself near the door. "Who are you really?" Morrison's demeanor shifted immediately, the bureaucratic facade dropping away to reveal something much more dangerous. "Someone who's been looking for Agent Phoenix for a very long time. Someone who has questions about what really happened in Kiev 3 years ago." The mention of Kiev sent a jolt of adrenaline through Sarah's system. Very few people knew the details of that operation, and even fewer would have reason to investigate it now. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't," Morrison said, pulling a tablet from his briefcase. "Just like you don't know why your entire team was walking into a trap that night. Just like you don't know why the intelligence you received was completely fabricated. Just like you don't know who made sure you were the only survivor." Sarah's mind raced back to that night in Kiev, to the warehouse that was supposed to contain a cell of arms dealers, but instead held a squad of Russian special forces. She remembered the sound of automatic weapons fire, the screams of her teammates, the desperate fight to escape through a building that had become a killing ground. She had replayed those moments thousands of times, looking for clues about what had gone wrong. But the official investigation had been sealed and her security clearance revoked before she could access any of the files. "What do you want?" Sarah asked quietly. Morrison activated the tablet and turned it toward her. The screen showed a series of bank transactions, encrypted communications, and surveillance photographs that painted a picture of systematic betrayal. "I want to know why Agent Phoenix was allowed to live when the rest of her team was eliminated. I want to know what makes her so special that someone went to great lengths to preserve her while destroying everyone else." Sarah studied the documents, her training allowing her to quickly assess their authenticity. The financial records showed payments flowing from accounts linked to Russian Intelligence services to someone within the CIA. The communications were heavily encrypted, but appeared to show coordination between an American asset and foreign handlers. The photograph showed meetings between agency personnel and individuals she recognized as known enemy operatives. "This proves nothing about me," Sarah said, though her voice lacked conviction. Morrison smiled again, but this time there was no warmth in it. "No, but it raises interesting questions. For instance, why would someone arrange for Phoenix to be transferred to a different section just weeks before the Kiev operation? Why would her security clearance be revoked immediately after the incident, preventing her from investigating what happened? Why would her resignation be processed so quickly that it bypassed normal review procedures?" Each question hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had wondered about all of these irregularities at the time, but her grief over losing her team and her own trauma from the incident had made it difficult to think clearly. The agency's explanation that she was being held responsible for the operational failure had seemed harsh but not entirely unreasonable given the catastrophic outcome. "You're suggesting I was complicit in my own team's deaths," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm suggesting someone wanted it to look that way," Morrison replied. "Someone who needed a scapegoat and found the perfect candidate in Agent Phoenix. Someone who could arrange for her to survive while her teammates died, creating the appearance of collaboration while actually protecting a valuable asset." Sarah sank into one of the conference room chairs, the weight of Morrison's implications crashing over her. If he was right, then her survival hadn't been luck or skill, it had been orchestrated. Someone had wanted her to live with the guilt and suspicion that came from being the sole survivor of a compromised operation. "But why?" she asked. "What would be the point of keeping me alive if they wanted to destroy my career?" Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying her carefully. "That's what I'm here to find out. You see, Ms. Chen, I represent a different part of the government than Director Walsh, a part that's been investigating the same intelligence breaches but from a different angle. And our investigation suggests that Agent Phoenix wasn't the perpetrator, she was the target." Sarah looked up sharply. "Target for what?" "Recruitment," Morrison said simply. "Someone wanted to burn Phoenix out of the agency so they could approach her independently. Someone who recognized her skills and wanted to turn her into a private asset, operating outside official channels." The pieces began to fall into place with sickening clarity. Sarah's rapid exile from the agency, the swift processing of her resignation, the way her security clearance had been handled, it all suggested coordination rather than bureaucratic incompetence. Someone had wanted her out of the system quickly and quietly, positioning her for eventual recruitment by hostile intelligence services. "Director Walsh," Sarah said, her voice hollow. "She's not trying to bring me back to help the agency. She's trying to complete the recruitment that started 3 years ago." Morrison nodded grimly. "Walsh has been under surveillance for months. We know she's been meeting with foreign intelligence operatives. We know she's been accessing classified information she has no legitimate need to see. And we know she's been identifying agency assets who might be vulnerable to recruitment." Sarah felt the world tilting around her. The meeting at Powell's, Walsh's claims about new evidence, and the need for Phoenix to return, all of it had been an elaborate deception designed to finally turn her into a genuine traitor. The irony was overwhelming. In trying to clear her name, she would have actually become the thing she had been falsely accused of being. "What do you want from me?" Sarah asked. Morrison reached into his briefcase again and produced a different tablet, this one containing what appeared to be legitimate government credentials and authorization documents. "We want you to play along. We want you to accept Walsh's recruitment and become a double agent, feeding her false information while helping us map her entire network." Sarah stared at the documents, recognizing the seals and signatures that indicated the highest levels of government authorization. "And if I refuse?" "Then Walsh will eventually approach you again, probably with threats rather than promises. And when she does, you'll have no protection, no backup, and no way to prove your innocence when her operation inevitably collapses. The conference room felt like a trap now, the walls closing in as Sarah contemplated her limited options. She could refuse Morrison's offer and hope that Walsh would simply disappear from her life. But that seemed unlikely given the resources and determination her former handler had already demonstrated. She could accept Walsh's recruitment and become a genuine traitor, trading her principles for financial security and the promise of protection. Or she could agree to Morrison's proposal and risk her life in a complex deception that could easily go wrong. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" Sarah asked. "How do I know this isn't just another layer of the same deception?" Morrison smiled for the first time since dropping his bureaucratic facade. "Because, Agent Phoenix, I was part of the team that investigated the Kiev operation. I saw the real intelligence reports, the ones that were classified above your clearance level. I know what you and your team were really doing in that warehouse, and I know why someone wanted you all dead." Sarah felt her heart rate spike. The Kiev operation had been compartmentalized to an extreme degree, with each team member knowing only their specific role and objectives. Even Sarah, as team leader, had been given limited information about the overall mission parameters. The idea that there were additional layers of intelligence she had never seen was both terrifying and compelling. "Tell me," she said. Morrison glanced at his electronic countermeasures device, confirming that their conversation remained secure. "Your team wasn't hunting arms dealers, Phoenix. You were investigating corruption within the agency itself. Specifically, you were tracking financial irregularities that suggested someone was selling classified information to foreign governments." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Arms dealing had seemed like a routine operation, the kind of mission her team had successfully completed dozens of times before. The idea that they had actually been investigating internal corruption explained why the intelligence had been so thoroughly compromised. They had been hunting the very person who was feeding them information. "Walsh," Sarah breathed. Walsh was one of the suspects, but not the only one. Your team was getting close to identifying the entire network when someone decided to eliminate the investigation permanently. The Kiev operation was supposed to kill all of you, removing the threat while making it look like a routine mission gone wrong. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering the faces of her teammates. Jessica Martinez, a communications specialist who had been planning her wedding. Kevin O'Brien, a former Marine who sent half his salary home to his disabled brother. Anna Volkov, a brilliant analyst who spoke 6 languages and collected vintage postcards. They had died not because of enemy action or operational bad luck, but because they had gotten too close to the truth about someone who was supposed to be on their side. "Why did I survive?" Sarah asked quietly. Morrison hesitated before answering. "Because you weren't supposed to be there that night. The original mission parameters called for a 5-person team, but you were added at the last minute when another team leader became unavailable. Walsh probably didn't have time to adjust the trap, so she had to improvise, letting you survive. As the scapegoat was actually clever, it explained the operational failure, while removing you from any position where you could continue the investigation." Sarah opened her eyes and looked directly at Morrison. "And now you want me to walk back into her web?" "We want you to help us finish what your team started," Morrison corrected. "Walsh isn't working alone. She's part of a larger network that's been compromising American intelligence operations for years. We need someone who can get close to her, someone she trusts enough to reveal the full scope of her activities." Sarah stood and walked to the conference room's small window, looking out at the library's main floor where patrons browsed peacefully among the stacks. The normalcy of the scene felt surreal given the conversation she was having. 3 days ago, her biggest concern had been processing overdue fines. Now she was being asked to risk her life to expose a conspiracy that had already cost her everything she had once valued. "What makes you think Walsh will trust me enough to reveal anything significant?" Sarah asked. Morrison joined her at the window. "Because she's been planning this recruitment for 3 years. She's invested considerable time and resources in positioning you exactly where she needs you. She's not going to give up easily, and she's not going to waste the opportunity now that she's finally made contact." Sarah thought about her meeting with Walsh at Powell's, remembering the woman's confidence and authority. There had been something almost proprietary in Walsh's manner, as if she had been discussing an asset she already owned rather than someone she was trying to recruit. The realization that her entire exile had been orchestrated made her feel sick, but it also kindled an anger that she hadn't felt since leaving the agency. "What kind of support would I have?" Sarah asked. Morrison pulled out another device, this one resembling a standard smartphone, but clearly containing more sophisticated technology. "Secure communications, emergency extraction protocols, and a backup team that will be monitoring your activities around the clock. We're not going to abandon you the way the agency did." Sarah took the phone, noting its weight and the subtle differences in its construction that suggested military-grade hardware. "And if something goes wrong? Then we extract you immediately and prosecute Walsh based on whatever intelligence we've gathered up to that point. It won't be ideal, but it'll be better than letting her continue to operate indefinitely." The decision felt simultaneously inevitable and impossible. Sarah knew that her quiet life as a librarian was already over, destroyed the moment Walsh had approached her at Powell's. She could try to run, to disappear completely and start over somewhere else, but that would mean abandoning any hope of justice for her dead teammates. She could accept Walsh's recruitment and hope for the best, but that would mean becoming the traitor she had been falsely accused of being. Or she could accept Morrison's proposal and risk everything in an attempt to finally learn the truth about Kiev. "I need guarantees," Sarah said finally. "I need to know that you won't abandon me. If things get complicated, I need to know that my teammates' families will finally learn the truth about what happened. And I need to know that when this is over, Agent Phoenix will be officially cleared of all suspicion." Morrison nodded. "Done, but I should warn you. This operation could take months to complete. Walsh will want to test your loyalty, to gradually increase your level of access and responsibility. You'll have to be convincing in your role as a turncoat, which means doing things that will feel like genuine betrayal." Sarah thought about the life she had built in Portland, the quiet routine that had given her peace after years of violence and deception. Margaret and her other colleagues at the library, the regular patrons who had become familiar faces, the small apartment that had finally felt like home, all of it would have to be sacrificed again in service of a mission that might not succeed. "When do we start?" Sarah asked. Morrison smiled and began packing his equipment back into the briefcase. "Walsh will contact you again within the next few days. When she does, you'll express initial reluctance but eventually agree to meet. You'll be skeptical but gradually convinced by whatever evidence she presents. You'll ask for time to consider her offer, then accept with apparent reluctance." Sarah watched him dismantle the countermeasures device, noting the practiced efficiency of his movements. And then Agent Phoenix comes back to life, but this time she's playing for our team. Morrison paused at the door. "Ms. Chen, I want you to know that what happened to your team in Kiev was not your fault. You were betrayed by people you trusted, but you survived for a reason. Now we're going to make sure that reason wasn't wasted." After Morrison left, Sarah sat alone in the conference room for several minutes, trying to process everything she had learned. The guilt she had carried for 3 years, the weight of being the sole survivor, the questions about whether she could have done something differently, all of it had been based on a lie. Her teammates had died not because of any failure on her part, but because they had been getting too close to exposing a network of traitors within their own organization. The anger that built in her chest was cold and focused, the kind of fury that had once made Agent Phoenix one of the CIS's most effective operatives. Walsh and her associates had murdered Jessica, Kevin, and Anna to protect their own crimes, then used Sarah's survival to cover their tracks. They had stolen 3 years of her life, forcing her into exile and isolation while they continued to profit from their betrayal of everything the agency was supposed to represent. When Sarah finally returned to her desk, Margaret was waiting with obvious concern. "Is everything all right?" "That man seemed very serious, and you were in there for quite a while." Sarah managed a smile that felt more natural than any she had worn in days. "Just some confusion about a background check. Nothing to worry about." Margaret looked relieved. "Good. I was starting to worry that we might lose you to some government job. The library wouldn't be the same without you." As Sarah resumed her work processing the mystery novels, she found herself thinking about the different kinds of mysteries that existed in the world. There were the comfortable puzzles found in books where all the clues eventually led to a satisfying resolution and justice was always served. Then there were the real-world mysteries, where the truth was often uglier than fiction and justice was something that had to be fought for rather than simply discovered. Agent Phoenix had spent her career solving the second kind of mystery, and it seemed that Sarah Chen's brief retirement was about to end. The librarian who had stamped due dates and recommended romance novels was going to have to step aside for the operative who had once tracked terrorists across 3 continents. The transition felt both natural and terrifying, like putting on a familiar but dangerous piece of clothing. That evening, Sarah began the process of mentally preparing for her return to the world of intelligence operations. She reviewed the skills that had been dormant for 3 years, practicing surveillance detection routes during her walk home and reacquainting herself with the mindset required for deep cover work. The apartment that had been her refuge would now become a staging area for the most important mission of her career. As she fell asleep that night, Sarah thought about Jessica, Kevin, and Anna, and about the justice that had been denied to them for 3 years. Tomorrow, Agent Phoenix would begin the process of earning that justice, even if it meant walking back into the darkness she had worked so hard to escape. The librarian's quiet life was over, but perhaps it had always been just an intermission in a story that was far from finished. Director Walsh's second contact came exactly as Morrison had predicted, though in a manner that Sarah hadn't anticipated. She was shelving returns in the history section when she noticed a book that hadn't been there, moments before a biography of Kim Philby, the infamous British double agent. Inside the front cover, written in pencil so light it was barely visible, was an address and a time: 1247 Northwest Thurman Street, tonight at 9 p.m. Sarah memorized the address and erased the message, her pulse quickening as she recognized the sophisticated tradecraft. The location was in the Pearl District, an upscale neighborhood where a meeting would blend seamlessly with the area's active nightlife. The choice of Philby's biography as a message carrier was either coincidence or a pointed reminder of the nature of the game she was about to enter. Throughout the remainder of her shift, Sarah maintained her usual demeanor, while mentally preparing for the evening's encounter. She had spent the weekend studying Morrison's briefing materials, familiarizing herself with Walsh's known associates and operational patterns. The woman was methodical and patient, preferring to build trust slowly rather than rushing into critical revelations. Tonight would likely be another step in a carefully orchestrated recruitment process. The address led to an elegant wine bar with exposed brick walls and intimate lighting that created natural pockets of privacy. Sarah arrived 10 minutes early, selecting a corner table that offered good sightlines while appearing casual to other patrons. She ordered a glass of Pinot Noir and opened a paperback novel, playing the role of someone enjoying a quiet evening out. Walsh appeared at exactly 9 o'clock, dressed casually but expensively in a way that suggested wealth without ostentation. She approached Sarah's table with a warm smile, as if they were old friends meeting for a social gathering rather than co-conspirators planning treason. "Sarah, thank you for coming," Walsh said, sliding into the opposite chair. "I hope you haven't been waiting long." Sarah closed her book and met Walsh's gaze steadily. "I almost didn't come at all. What you're asking me to do, it's not something I take lightly." Walsh nodded approvingly, as if Sarah's reluctance was exactly what she had expected. "I understand your hesitation. After what the agency did to you, trust doesn't come easily. But I hope you'll give me a chance to show you that not everyone in the intelligence community is content with the status quo." A server approached their table, and Walsh ordered a glass of Chardonnay before turning her attention back to Sarah. "Tell me, what have you missed most about your old life?" The question seemed innocuous, but Sarah recognized it as a psychological probe designed to identify her motivations and vulnerabilities. She had prepared for this type of inquiry, crafting responses that would seem genuine while serving Morrison's objectives. "The sense of purpose," Sarah answered after a moment of apparent consideration. "In the library, I help people find information, but it's mundane. When I was Phoenix, every mission mattered. Every decision could save lives or prevent disasters. I felt like I was making a real difference in the world." Walsh leaned forward slightly, her expression sympathetic. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. The work I'm offering would give you that sense of purpose again, but without the bureaucratic constraints and political limitations that hamstring official operations." Sarah took a sip of her wine, using the pause to observe Walsh's body language and micro-expressions. The woman was confident but not arrogant, persuasive without being pushy. She had clearly done this before, and successfully. "When we talked at Powell's, you mentioned evidence of corruption within the agency," Sarah said. "What exactly are we talking about?" Walsh reached into her purse and withdrew a tablet, but she didn't activate it immediately. "Before I show you anything classified, I need to know that you're genuinely interested in hearing the truth, regardless of how disturbing it might be." Sarah nodded, projecting the kind of intense curiosity that would be natural for someone who had been denied answers for 3 years. "I've spent every day since Kiev wondering what really happened. If you have answers, I want to hear them." Walsh activated the tablet and angled it so both women could see the screen. The documents that appeared were similar to what Morrison had shown her, but with additional layers of detail that suggested access to higher-level intelligence. Financial records showed millions of dollars flowing through offshore accounts. Communication intercepts revealed coordination between agency personnel and foreign operatives, and operational timelines demonstrated a pattern of compromised missions dating back nearly a decade. "This network has been operating for years," Walsh explained quietly. "They've sold weapons locations to terrorist groups, revealed the identities of foreign assets to hostile governments, and manipulated intelligence assessments to serve their own financial interests. Hundreds of people have died because of their activities." Sarah studied the documents with the analytical skills that had made Agent Phoenix effective, noting details that confirmed Morrison's briefing while identifying new information that would be valuable to the counterintelligence operation. "How do you know all this?" Walsh's expression grew somber. "Because I was recruited by them, initially. 5 years ago, I was approached by someone I trusted. Someone who convinced me that the agency's official mission was compromised by political interference. They offered me a chance to serve American interests more effectively through unofficial channels. The admission was perfectly crafted to create a sense of shared experience and mutual trust." Sarah recognized the technique while appreciating its skillful execution. "What changed your mind?" "I discovered that their true loyalty wasn't to America at all," Walsh replied. "They were selling our secrets to the highest bidder, regardless of the consequences. When I tried to withdraw from their operations, they made it clear that leaving wasn't an option." Walsh swiped to a new set of documents, these showing surveillance photographs of herself meeting with individuals Sarah now recognized as Russian intelligence operatives. They have enough evidence to destroy my career and send me to prison. For treason. The only way I can protect myself is by gathering intelligence on their activities and eventually exposing the entire network. Sarah felt a chill as she realized the sophistication of the deception she was witnessing. Walsh was presenting herself as a victim of coercion rather than a willing participant, creating sympathy while establishing her credibility as a source of inside information. The performance was masterful, and Sarah found herself understanding why so many intelligence professionals had been successfully recruited by similar approaches. "Where do I fit into this?" Sarah asked. Walsh leaned back in her chair, her expression becoming more businesslike. "I need someone with your skills and background who can operate independently. Someone who isn't currently associated with any official agency, but who has the training and experience to gather intelligence and conduct operations." Sarah frowned, maintaining the skeptical demeanor that would be natural in this situation. "What kind of operations?" "Document acquisition, surveillance, communication interception. Nothing that would directly harm American interests, but activities that would help us map the network and gather evidence of their crimes." Walsh paused, studying Sarah's reaction carefully. "I won't lie to you, there would be some activities that might technically violate federal law. But sometimes justice requires working outside official channels." The offer was being presented gradually, allowing Sarah to become psychologically invested before revealing the full scope of what would be expected. It was a classic recruitment technique, and Sarah had to admire Walsh's patience and skill, even while despising her ultimate objectives. "What kind of compensation are we talking about?" Sarah asked, knowing that financial considerations would be a natural concern for someone in her supposed position. Walsh smiled, clearly pleased that the conversation had moved toward practical considerations. "Enough to ensure that you never have to worry about money again. The network pays well for quality work, and they value professionals who can deliver results without supervision." Sarah took another sip of wine, using the gesture to cover her careful observation of Walsh's micro-expressions. The woman was confident and relaxed, clearly believing that the recruitment was proceeding exactly as planned. "I need time to think about this." Walsh nodded as if she had expected this response. "Of course. This isn't a decision to make lightly. But I should mention that time is somewhat limited. The network is planning a major operation in the coming months, and they'll need additional personnel to ensure its success." The mention of a major operation sent a spike of adrenaline through Sarah's system. If Walsh was telling the truth about this aspect of her story, then Morrison's counterintelligence operation had stumbled onto something much larger than a simple corruption investigation. "What kind of major operation?" Sarah asked. Walsh glanced around the wine bar, noting the other patrons and their proximity before responding. "The kind that could fundamentally alter the balance of power in several regions of the world. The kind that official channels would never approve, but that serves certain interests very well." Sarah felt her training kick in as she processed the implications of Walsh's statement. "An operation significant enough to alter regional power balances would require substantial resources and high-level coordination. It might involve weapons transfers, intelligence sharing with hostile governments, or the elimination of key personnel who pose threats to the network's activities." "How much time do I have to decide?" Sarah asked. Walsh finished her wine and signaled for the check. "A week, perhaps 2 at most. After that, they'll need to move forward with other arrangements." She paused, her expression becoming more serious. "Sarah, I want you to understand that this opportunity won't come again. The network doesn't make offers like this frequently, and they don't accept rejection gracefully. The implied threat was delivered with such subtlety that it could almost be interpreted as concern rather than coercion. Sarah recognized the technique as another sophisticated manipulation, designed to create urgency while maintaining the illusion that she had a genuine choice in the matter. After Walsh left, Sarah remained at the wine bar for another 30 minutes, nursing a second glass of wine while reviewing the evening's conversation in her mind. Every detail of Walsh's presentation had been carefully crafted to appeal to Phoenix's psychology and apparent circumstances. The woman had done her homework, understanding exactly which buttons to push and which approaches would be most effective. The walk back to her apartment took longer than usual as Sarah followed the surveillance detection route Morrison had taught her, checking for any signs that Walsh might be having her followed. The counterintelligence team needed to know about the major operation Walsh had mentioned, but they also needed to maintain the illusion that Sarah was genuinely considering the recruitment offer. Back in her apartment, Sarah activated the secure phone Morrison had given her and sent a coded message summarizing the evening's events. The response came within minutes. Excellent progress. Maintain reluctant interest. Next contact in 48 hours. Over the following days, Sarah continued her routine at the library while mentally preparing for the next phase of the operation. Morrison's team was conducting background surveillance on Walsh and her known associates, trying to identify the full scope of the network and the nature of the major operation she had mentioned. Sarah's role was to continue the recruitment process, gradually allowing herself to be drawn deeper into Walsh's web while gathering intelligence on the organization's structure and objectives. The next contact came through another book, this time a collection of short stories by John le Carre, found on her desk when she returned from lunch. The message inside was longer and more detailed, providing an address in Southeast Portland and instructions for a more substantial meeting. Sarah was to come alone, bring no electronic devices, and be prepared for a more thorough discussion of operational requirements. The location was a private residence in an upscale neighborhood, a modest but well-maintained house that suggested middle-class respectability rather than wealth or secrecy. Sarah approached the address at the specified time, noting the subtle security measures that marked it as more than a typical suburban home. The windows were fitted with security film, the landscaping provided clear sightlines while limiting approach routes, and the front door was reinforced in a way that suggested professional installation. Walsh answered the door personally, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater that made her appear more approachable than she had in their previous meetings. "Sarah, come in. I hope you weren't followed." The interior of the house was comfortable but unremarkable, furnished in a style that could belong to any professional couple in their 50s. Walsh led her to a study lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large oak desk. Two other people were waiting there, a man and woman who radiated the kind of quiet competence that Sarah associated with experienced intelligence operatives. "Sarah, I'd like you to meet two of my colleagues," Walsh said. "This is Robert Hayes and Linda Morrison. They're part of the team that's been investigating the corruption we discussed." Sarah shook hands with both individuals, noting their firm grips and the way they studied her with professional assessment. Hayes was perhaps 45, with graying hair and the kind of weathered features that suggested extensive field experience. Morrison was younger, maybe 35, with sharp eyes and the athletic build of someone who maintained rigorous physical conditioning. "We've heard a lot about Agent Phoenix," Hayes said, his voice carrying a slight southern accent. "Your reputation for getting results under difficult circumstances is impressive." Sarah inclined her head slightly, accepting the compliment while maintaining the cautious demeanor appropriate to her supposed situation. "That was a long time ago. I'm not sure how relevant those skills are anymore." Linda Morrison smiled. "Skills like yours don't deteriorate with disuse. They're like muscle memory, they come back quickly when needed." Walsh gestured for everyone to sit, then activated an electronic device similar to the one Morrison had used at the library. We can speak freely now. I've brought Robert and Linda here because they represent the operational side of our organization. If you decide to join us, you'll be working closely with them." Sarah settled into a leather chair, projecting interest while maintaining her guard. "What exactly would I be working on?" Hayes leaned forward, his expression becoming more serious. "We've identified a series of intelligence leaks that have compromised American operations across 3 continents. The leaks are coming from inside the agency, but they're being coordinated by someone with access to the highest levels of classified information." Linda Morrison picked up the explanation. "We've traced the communication patterns and financial flows, but we need someone who can get close to the source. Someone who can gather the kind of evidence that would stand up in court." Sarah frowned, playing the role of someone trying to understand the scope of what was being asked. "Are we talking about surveillance, document theft?" "What kind of evidence gathering?" Walsh answered carefully. "All of the above, potentially. The target is sophisticated and well protected. Traditional investigation methods haven't been effective, so we need to employ more creative approaches." The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours, with Hayes and Morrison providing additional details about the supposed corruption investigation, while Walsh guided the discussion toward operational specifics. Sarah learned that the network consisted of at least a dozen individuals across multiple agencies, that they had been selling classified information for substantial sums, and that their activities had resulted in the deaths of numerous American assets overseas. What emerged was a picture of systematic betrayal that was both sophisticated and devastating in its scope. The network had allegedly been operating for nearly a decade, using their positions within the intelligence community to identify valuable information and sell it to foreign governments and terrorist organizations. The profits were substantial, running into tens of millions of dollars, and the operational security was tight enough that official investigations had failed to identify the key players. "The evidence we've gathered so far is compelling, but not sufficient for prosecution," Hayes explained. "We need someone who can get inside their operational security and document their activities directly." Sarah asked the kinds of questions that would be natural for someone considering such a dangerous undertaking. What kind of support would be available? How would her safety be protected? What would happen if she were discovered? The answers were reassuring but vague, promising substantial backup and extraction capabilities without providing specific details. As the meeting concluded, Walsh handed Sarah a secure phone similar to the one Morrison had provided. "This will allow us to communicate safely. The encryption is military grade, and the device is configured to appear like a standard smartphone to any casual inspection." Sarah accepted the phone, noting its weight and construction. "What's the next step?" Walsh smiled. "We wait for you to decide, but I hope you'll give serious consideration to joining us. The work we're doing is important, and we need someone with your particular skills to help us complete it successfully." The drive back to her apartment gave Sarah time to process the evening's events. The recruitment was proceeding exactly as Morrison had predicted, with Walsh gradually revealing more information while building trust and psychological investment. The presence of Hayes and Morrison suggested that the network was larger and more organized than initial intelligence had indicated. Most importantly, the details about the major operation were beginning to come into focus. If the network was planning something significant enough to require additional personnel, it likely involved either a massive intelligence transfer or a direct action operation that would require specialized skills. Either possibility represented a serious threat to national security. Back in her apartment, Sarah transmitted a detailed report to Morrison's team using the secure communication protocols they had established. The response was immediate and urgent. "Excellent intelligence. Accept recruitment offer tomorrow. Operational. Teams are being positioned." As Sarah prepared for bed, she reflected on the strange circumstances that had brought her to this point. 3 years ago, she had been forced out of the intelligence community in disgrace, carrying the guilt of her teammates' deaths and the suspicion of her colleagues. Now she was being recruited by the very people responsible for that tragedy, and her acceptance of their offer would begin the process of bringing them to justice. The irony was profound, but so was the opportunity. Agent Phoenix was about to rise from the ashes once again, but this time she would be serving a cause that truly mattered. The library worker who had stamped books and answered research questions was about to become a double agent in the most important counterintelligence operation of her career. Tomorrow, Sarah Chen would accept Director Walsh's recruitment offer, beginning her journey back into the world of shadows and deception. But this time, she would be fighting for justice rather than running from it, and the memory of her fallen teammates would guide her through whatever dangers lay ahead. The call came at 3 in the morning, jolting Sarah from restless sleep. Walsh's voice was tense, stripped of its usual polished composure. "Phoenix, we need you now. There's been a development." Sarah forced herself to sound groggy, as if the call had genuinely awakened her. "What kind of development?" "The kind that moves our timeline up significantly. Can you be at the East Side Industrial Complex in an hour? Building 47, 3rd floor. Come alone and bring nothing electronic." The line went dead before Sarah could respond. She lay in bed for 30 seconds, processing the implications of the urgent summons, then reached for the secure phone Morrison had given her. His team needed to know about this development, but they also needed time to position surveillance assets around the industrial complex. The coded message she sent was brief: emergency activation. Building 47, East Side Industrial. 1 hour. The response came within minutes. Assets moving. Maintain cover. Backup in position. Sarah dressed quickly in dark clothing and sturdy boots, the kind of practical gear that suggested someone prepared for potentially dangerous work. She left her apartment through the back exit, taking a circuitous route that would allow Morrison's team to track her movement while appearing to follow basic operational security. The East Side Industrial Complex was a sprawling collection of warehouses and manufacturing facilities that had seen better days. Many of the buildings stood empty, their windows dark and parking lots weed-strewn. Building 47 was one of the larger structures, a 4-story concrete edifice that had once housed a textile manufacturing operation. Sarah parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, her senses heightened to detect any signs of surveillance or ambush. The building's main entrance was secured, but a side door stood slightly ajar, as if someone had recently passed through without bothering to ensure it closed completely. The interior was dimly lit by emergency lighting, casting long shadows across empty corridors lined with abandoned offices. Sarah's footsteps echoed despite her efforts to move quietly, the sound bouncing off bare walls and concrete floors. She found the stairwell and climbed to the 3rd floor, where a faint glow emanated from beneath a door at the far end of the hallway. The room beyond contained sophisticated communication equipment and multiple computer workstations, a high-tech operations center hidden within the shell of an abandoned building. Walsh stood at the central console, her fingers flying across a keyboard as data streamed across multiple monitors. Hayes was stationed at a surveillance console, watching feeds from cameras positioned around the complex perimeter. "Phoenix, thank God you're here," Walsh said, without looking up from her screen. "We've got a problem. Someone's been investigating our investigation." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. Had Morrison's operation been discovered, or was this another layer of deception designed to test her loyalty? "What do you mean?" Hayes turned from his monitors, his expression grim. "We've identified surveillance on several of our team members. Professional-grade work, probably federal. Someone knows we're onto the corruption network, and they're moving to shut us down." Walsh pulled up a series of photographs on her central monitor, showing government agents conducting surveillance on individuals Sarah now recognized as part of Walsh's organization. The images were clear enough to identify faces and equipment, suggesting access to high-quality intelligence sources. "We think there's a mole in our group," Walsh continued. "Someone who's been feeding information to the corrupt officials we're investigating. They know we're getting close to exposing them, so they're launching a preemptive strike." Sarah studied the photographs, noting details that would help Morrison's team identify the surveillance subjects and adjust their own operations accordingly. "What does this mean for our mission?" Walsh finally looked up from her console, her expression intense. "It means we have to move tonight. We've located the primary server where the corruption network stores their operational files. If we can access it and download the evidence, we'll have everything we need to expose them before they can destroy the data." Hayes activated a wall-mounted display showing architectural plans for a government facility. Sarah recognized as a classified NS, a storage facility outside Portland. Red markers indicated security cameras, access points, and patrol routes, while blue lines showed suggested infiltration paths. "The server is housed in a secure facility, but we've identified a vulnerability in their perimeter security," Hayes explained. "A maintenance tunnel that provides access to the building's sub-basement. From there, you can reach the server room without triggering the main security systems." Sarah examined the plans carefully, her training allowing her to quickly assess the challenges and risks involved. The facility was heavily protected, with multiple layers of physical and electronic security. Even with the maintenance tunnel access, reaching the server room would require considerable skill and more than a little luck. "What about backup?" Sarah asked. "If something goes wrong, how do I get out?" Walsh moved to another console and brought up a tactical map showing the facility's surroundings. "Linda Morrison is positioned as your overwatch. She monitors security communications and provide early warning if your presence is detected. Robert will be standing by with extraction assets if you need emergency evacuation." The plan was ambitious and dangerous, exactly the kind of high-stakes operation that would appeal to someone with Agent Phoenix's background and psychology. Sarah recognized the sophisticated manipulation, even while appreciating the operational planning that had gone into it. "What's the real target?" Sarah asked quietly. Walsh and Hayes exchanged glances, and Sarah caught a flicker of something in their expressions that suggested surprise at her directness. "What do you mean?" Walsh asked. Sarah moved closer to the display showing the facility plans. "This isn't about exposing corruption. NSA storage facilities don't house financial records or communication intercepts from domestic corruption investigations. They house classified intelligence on foreign operations, military capabilities, and strategic assets." The silence that followed her observation was pregnant with tension. Hayes's hand moved subtly toward his jacket, where Sarah's trained eye noted the outline of a concealed weapon. Walsh's expression shifted from surprise to calculation, as if she were rapidly reassessing her approach to the conversation. "You're more perceptive than we expected," Walsh said finally. "Yes, there's more to this operation than we initially revealed. But the fundamental objective remains the same. We're trying to prevent classified information from being sold to hostile foreign governments." Sarah kept her expression neutral while her mind raced through the implications. "By stealing it ourselves?" Walsh smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. "By ensuring it reaches the right hands rather than the wrong ones. The corruption network we've been investigating has been selling American intelligence to the highest bidder. We're going to intercept that sale and redirect the information to allies who will use it to protect American interests." The admission confirmed Sarah's suspicions about the true nature of Walsh's organization. They weren't investigating corruption, they were the corruption, a network of intelligence professionals who had gone rogue and were operating as mercenaries for foreign governments. The sophisticated recruitment process, the careful psychological manipulation, the gradual revelation of operational details, all of it had been designed to turn Agent Phoenix into an unwitting asset in their espionage operation. Which allies? Sarah asked. Hayes stepped forward, his hand now openly resting on his weapon. Does it matter? You're already committed, Phoenix. You've accepted our recruitment, you know our faces and operational methods, and you've seen classified information about ongoing operations. Whether you complete tonight's mission or not, you're part of this organization now. The threat was delivered with casual professionalism, but Sarah recognized it as a fundamental shift in the dynamic. The recruitment phase was over, replaced by coercion and intimidation. She was no longer a potential asset being courted. She was a captured operative being directed. And if I refuse? Sarah asked. Walsh moved to yet another console and activated a display showing surveillance photographs of Sarah's apartment, the library where she worked, and several locations she frequented. Then you'll suffer an unfortunate accident. Car crash, maybe. Or a robbery gone wrong. These things happen in a city like Portland. Sarah felt a familiar calm settle over her as the situation clarified. The pretense was finally gone, replaced by the straightforward threat of violence that she understood far better than psychological manipulation. Agent Phoenix had always been most effective when the parameters were clear and the stakes were. Life or death, what's the timeline? Sarah asked. Walsh checked her watch. The facility's night shift change happens at 4 a.m. That gives us a 2-hour window, when security coverage is at its minimum. You'll need to be inside the maintenance tunnel by 4:30. Sarah nodded, appearing to accept the mission parameters, while mentally reviewing the signals Morrison's team would be monitoring for. The secure phone they had given her contained a passive tracking device that would allow them to follow her movement into the facility. More importantly, it contained an emergency beacon that would summon immediate tactical support if activated. The next hour was spent in operational preparation. Hayes provided her with specialized equipment, night vision goggles, electronic lock picks, and a portable data storage device capable of downloading terabytes of information in minutes. Walsh briefed her on the server room layout and the specific files she was supposed to access. The intelligence they wanted was extensive and specific. Military deployment schedules, diplomatic communication protocols, foreign asset identities, and strategic weapons capabilities. It was exactly the kind of information that would be invaluable to hostile governments planning operations against American interests. As Sarah prepared to leave for the facility, Walsh pulled her aside for a final conversation. Phoenix, I want you to understand that what we're doing tonight will change everything. After this operation, there's no going back to your quiet life as a librarian. You'll be working with us full-time on operations around the world. Sarah met Walsh's gaze steadily. I understand. What Walsh didn't understand was that Sarah had no intention of completing the mission as planned. Morrison's team would be tracking her movement in the facility, and the moment she activated the emergency beacon, tactical units would move in to arrest Walsh and her associates. The evidence of their espionage activities would be overwhelming, and the counterintelligence operation would finally achieve its objective. The drive to the NSA facility took 30 minutes through empty pre-dawn streets. Sarah parked in a location that would appear operationally sound while providing Morrison's surveillance team with clear sight lines. The maintenance tunnel access was exactly where Hayes had indicated, hidden behind a cluster of utility buildings and protected by a simple electronic lock that yielded quickly to her specialized equipment. The tunnel was narrow and uncomfortable, forcing Sarah to crawl for nearly 200 meters through darkness that seemed to press against her from all directions. Her night vision equipment revealed a straight path that ended at a vertical shaft leading up into the facility's sub-basement. Sarah emerged into a mechanical room filled with heating and air conditioning equipment that provided excellent cover for her infiltration. The building's interior was exactly as Hayes had described, with corridors that led directly to the server room where the classified intelligence was stored. But as Sarah moved through the facility, she began to notice details that didn't match the briefing she had received. The security systems were more sophisticated than Hayes had indicated, with additional cameras and motion sensors that suggested the facility's protection was far more comprehensive than Walsh's team had revealed. More troubling was the realization that the server room she was approaching didn't match the layout from Hayes's plans. The corridors were arranged differently, the security doors were heavier, and the electronic locks were military-grade rather than commercial systems. Sarah paused outside her room door, suddenly understanding the full scope of the deception she was witnessing. Walsh's organization hadn't just been lying about their objectives, they had been lying about the facility itself. This wasn't an NSA storage site containing intelligence on foreign operations. It was a CIA black site where the most sensitive domestic counterintelligence operations were coordinated. The files she was being directed to steal weren't foreign intelligence. They were the complete records of Morrison's investigation into Walsh's network. Every asset, every operation, every piece of evidence that could be used to prosecute the espionage ring was stored in the servers she was now being asked to compromise. Sarah activated the emergency beacon on her secure phone and stepped away from the server room door. Within seconds, she could hear the distant sound of vehicles approaching the facility at high speed. Morrison's tactical team was moving into position, but Walsh's people would be monitoring police communications and would know that their operation had been compromised. The realization that she was trapped in a high-security government facility while a firefight erupted outside was both terrifying and oddly liberating. Agent Phoenix had spent 3 years hiding from her true nature, but now there was nowhere left to hide. The skills and instincts that had made her one of the CIS's most effective operatives were about to be tested in the most critical mission of her career. The facility's alarm system activated with a piercing wail that echoed through the corridors as emergency lighting bathed everything in harsh red illumination. Sarah could hear the sound of tactical teams breaching the building's perimeter, followed by the sharp crack of gunfire as Walsh's people attempted to fight their way out of the trap Morrison had prepared. Sarah moved through the facility with the fluid efficiency of someone operating in their natural element. The years of exile and doubt fell away as muscle memory and training took control. She was no longer the quiet librarian who stamped books and helped elderly patrons find large print mysteries. She was Agent Phoenix, and she was finally home. The confrontation with Walsh came in the facility's main corridor, where the CIA director waited with a pistol drawn and desperation written across her features. "You betrayed us," Walsh said, her voice carrying a note of genuine surprise. "After everything we offered you, after all the lies the agency told about your past, you still chose them over us." Sarah stood 15 feet away, her hands visible and empty, projecting calm confidence in the face of Walsh's weapon. "I chose justice over profit. I chose my country over your bank account. And I chose to honor my teammates' memory instead of letting their deaths be meaningless." Walsh's expression shifted to confusion. "Your teammates? What are you talking about?" "Kiev," Sarah said simply. "Jessica Martinez, Kevin O'Brien, Anna Volkov. The people you murdered to cover up your espionage activities." Understanding dawned. In Walsh's eyes followed quickly by a smile that was genuinely chilling. "You really don't know, do you? You still believe the story Morrison fed you about corruption and betrayal?" Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "What story?" Walsh laughed, a sound devoid of humor or warmth. "Phoenix, there is no corruption network. There never was. Morrison isn't running a counterintelligence operation. He's running a recruitment operation. Everything that's happened to you, from Kiev to tonight, has been designed to turn you into an asset for Russian intelligence." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. If Walsh was telling the truth, Then Morrison's entire operation had been an elaborate deception designed to manipulate her into betraying the very country she thought she was serving. The evidence he had shown her, the surveillance photographs, the financial records, all of it could have been fabricated to support his psychological manipulation. "You're lying," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. Walsh lowered her weapon slightly. "Morrison was a Russian asset long before he contacted you. The Kiev operation was real, but your team wasn't investigating corruption, they were investigating him. He eliminated them to protect his cover, then spent 3 years positioning you for recruitment by creating the perfect psychological conditions for turning you against the agency." Sarah's mind raced through the implications of Walsh's claims. Morrison had approached her with exactly the right story at exactly the right time, offering her the opportunity to clear her name and get justice for her teammates. He had provided her with evidence that confirmed her suspicions about Walsh, while directing her to infiltrate what he claimed was a hostile espionage network. But if Walsh was telling the truth, then Sarah had just helped the real enemy identify and neutralize a legitimate CIA operation designed to protect American interests. The emergency beacon she had activated wasn't summoning rescue, it was summoning Morrison's team to arrest the very people who had been trying to stop him. "Prove it," Sarah said. Walsh reached slowly into her jacket and withdrew a tablet, activating it to display a series of documents that appeared to be genuine CIA operational files. The records showed Morrison's true identity as a Russian GRU officer who had been operating under deep cover for over a decade. They showed his role in compromising multiple American intelligence operations, including the Kiev mission that had resulted in her teammates' deaths. Most damning of all, they showed a detailed psychological profile of Agent Phoenix and a recruitment plan that matched every interaction she had experienced with Morrison's organization. The financial records that had convinced her of Walsh's guilt were revealed as sophisticated forgeries designed to support Morrison's deception. "The team that's about to breach this facility isn't American," Walsh said quietly. "They're Morrison's people, and they're here to eliminate everyone who knows about his operation. Including you, Phoenix. You've served your purpose." Sarah heard the sound of tactical boots in the corridor behind her and knew that time was running out. Whether Walsh was telling the truth or perpetrating another layer of deception, the situation had evolved beyond her ability to control. Agent Phoenix had walked into a trap that was far more sophisticated than anything she had previously encountered. The gunfire that erupted in the corridor was brief but intense. When it ended, Morrison appeared around the corner with a team of heavily armed operatives who moved with military precision. His expression was calm and professional, showing none of the concern that would be appropriate for someone conducting a rescue operation. "Agent Phoenix," Morrison said, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction, "you've done excellent work tonight. The intelligence you've helped us gather will be invaluable to our operations." Sarah looked from Morrison to Walsh, understanding finally dawning. Both of them had been lying, but in different ways. Walsh was indeed a CIA officer, but she was also corrupt, selling classified information to foreign governments. Morrison was Russian intelligence, but he was also genuinely investigating Walsh's network as part of his own espionage activities. The entire operation had been a complex game of triple agents and competing loyalties, with Sarah caught in the middle as an unwitting pawn. Her teammates had died not because of corruption or betrayal, but because they had stumbled into the middle of an intelligence war that had been raging for years. Beneath the surface of official operations, what happens now? Sarah asked. Morrison smiled, but his hand rested casually on his sidearm. "Now you complete your transformation into Agent Phoenix. You'll work for us full-time, using your skills and access to gather intelligence on American operations. Or you'll join your teammates in whatever afterlife you believe in." Sarah felt the familiar calm of absolute clarity settle over her. The confusion and manipulation of the past weeks fell away, replaced by the simple understanding that she was facing an enemy who needed to be stopped. Agent Phoenix had been created in the crucible of betrayal and loss, but she had been forged into something far stronger than either Morrison or Walsh had anticipated. The tactical vest she wore contained more than just communication equipment. Morrison's team had been thorough in their preparation, but they had also been overconfident. The explosive device hidden in her equipment was small, but sufficient for her purposes, and the detonator was disguised as an innocent piece of electronics. "I choose option 3, Sarah said, activating the detonator. The explosion that followed was carefully calculated to disable rather than kill, designed to create chaos and confusion rather than massive destruction. Sarah had positioned herself to absorb the worst of the blast, accepting the sacrifice necessary to ensure that Morrison and his team would be neutralized. When she regained consciousness 6 hours later in a secure medical facility, Director Catherine Walsh was sitting beside her bed. But this Walsh was different from the woman she had met at Powell's Books or encountered in the storage facility. This Walsh wore the uniform of a CIA deputy director and carried herself with the authority of someone who had never been corrupt or compromised. "Agent Phoenix," Walsh said quietly, "welcome back to the real world." Sarah's head was bandaged and her left arm was in a sling, but her mind was clear for the first time in weeks. "Who are you really?" Walsh smiled, and this time the expression reached her eyes. "I'm exactly who I said I was the first time we met. CIA Deputy Director Catherine Walsh, running a counterintelligence operation to identify and neutralize a Russian espionage network that had penetrated the highest levels of American intelligence." Sarah closed her eyes, trying to process the implications. Morrison was indeed Russian GRU, operating under deep cover for 12 years. He was responsible for compromising dozens of American operations, including the Kiev mission that killed your team. But he's in custody now, along with his entire network. Sarah opened her eyes and met Walsh's gaze. "And the corruption you showed me? The evidence of financial crimes?" Walsh reached into her briefcase and withdrew a genuine CIA identification card bearing Sarah's photograph and the name Agent Phoenix. "Was real, but it belonged to Morrison's network, not mine. You helped us map their entire operation, gather evidence of their crimes, and identify their methods. The intelligence you provided will prevent countless future operations from being compromised." The identification card felt solid and real in Sarah's hands, unlike the psychological manipulations and fabricated evidence she had been shown over the past weeks. For the first time since Kiev, Agent Phoenix was exactly who she appeared to be. A CIA operative serving her country's interests without deception or hidden agendas. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. Walsh stood and moved to the window, looking out at the secure facility where Sarah was recovering. "Now you have a choice to make. The real choice that Morrison and his people never offered you. You can return to your life as Sarah Chen, the librarian, with a full pension and a clean service record. Or you can come back to work as Agent Phoenix, leading a new counterintelligence unit dedicated to preventing future penetrations of American intelligence." Sarah thought about her apartment above the Vietnamese restaurant, the quiet routine of library work, the peaceful anonymity she had maintained for 3 years. It had been a good life in its way, but it had also been a lie. Agent Phoenix was her true identity, and the work of protecting American interests was her true calling. "The new unit," Sarah said. "What would be its mission?" Walsh turned from the window, her expression serious. "To hunt down the remaining Russian assets that Morrison's network left behind. To identify and neutralize future penetration attempts. To ensure that what happened to your team in Kiev never happens to anyone else." Sarah sat up carefully, ignoring the pain in her injured arm. "When do I start?" Walsh smiled. "As soon as the doctors clear you for duty. But Phoenix, I want you to understand that this work will be dangerous. We're not just hunting individual spies. We're dismantling entire networks that have been operating for decades. The people we're going after have resources, training, and motivation that makes them extremely dangerous opponents. Sarah thought about Jessica, Kevin, and Anna, about the 3 years she had spent in exile, believing herself responsible for their deaths, about the justice that had finally been served. Director Walsh, with respect, I've been hunting dangerous opponents my entire career. The only difference now is that I know exactly who the enemy is. 6 months later, Agent Phoenix stood in a briefing room at CIA headquarters, addressing a team of counterintelligence specialists who had volunteered for the most dangerous assignment in the agency. The PowerPoint presentation behind her showed photographs of suspected Russian assets, financial networks, and operational patterns that represented years of patient intelligence gathering. Our mission is simple, Phoenix told her team. We find them, we neutralize them, and we make sure they never have the opportunity to betray American interests again. Some of these people have been operating for decades. They have families, careers, and lives that appear completely legitimate. But underneath that facade, they're enemies of everything we've sworn to protect. The team members listened with the intense focus of professionals who understood the stakes involved. These were volunteers who had given up comfortable desk jobs and predictable careers to join Phoenix in work that was both essential and extremely hazardous. Questions? Phoenix asked. A young analyst raised her hand. Ma'am, what makes you think we can succeed where previous investigations have failed? Phoenix smiled, thinking about the journey that had brought her from the quiet corridors of the Portland Public Library to this briefing room where the future of American intelligence security was being planned. Because this time we're not investigating from the outside. We've been inside their operations, we understand their methods, and we know how they think. More importantly, we know that the work we're doing honors the memory of every American intelligence professional who has died in service to their country. The briefing continued for another hour, covering operational protocols, security procedures, and the complex legal frameworks that governed counterintelligence activities on American soil. When it concluded, Phoenix remained in the conference room, studying the photographs of suspected Russian assets and thinking about the long campaign that lay ahead. Agent Phoenix had finally come home, not to the quiet anonymity of civilian life, but to the work that had always defined her. The library worker who had hidden a deadly secret was gone, replaced by a counterintelligence professional who would spend the rest of her career ensuring that American secrets remained American. The war was far from over, but for the first time since Kiev, Phoenix was fighting on the right side with the right weapons for the right reasons. Justice had been served, but vigilance would be eternal. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.